looking as the flowers. I sit for hours, telling all the bluebirds, the bill and coo birds, pretty little baby, I'm so in love with you.
We're pulling back the curtain of one of the most powerful and the most hypocritical agencies in the United States government, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. This is the same agency that will make pharmaceutical companies wait 15 years and spend $2.6 billion to approve a single drug. Well, letting the food companies dump chemicals into your children's cereal that have been banned in over 30 countries. But the same agency that has fast-tracked opioids and killed 500,000 Americans is also blocking dying patients from accessing their own stem cells. And yes, stem cells. They are one of the most greatest medical breakthroughs in human history. That is where we're going tonight, because what the FDA has done to stem cell research is one of the greatest medical scandals of our lifetime. But to understand where we are, we have to understand where this all started. And so it starts with the hook. A dead chemist, 107 Americans, and most of them are children. So the year is 1906. America is an industry powerhouse, but nobody is watching what goes into your food or into your medicine. Then Upton Sinclair writes The Jungle, a book so disturbing that even President Theodore Roosevelt read it over breakfast and immediately lost his appetite. Workers failing into the meat processing vats, rat poisoning mixed into sausage, and diseased cattle sold to the public without question. Congress responded with the Pure Food Drug Act of 1906 and the federal attempt to regulate what Americans consumed, but it almost had no enforcement power. It was a warning, but not the solution. The real wake-up call came 31 years later. In 1937, a pharmaceutical company called S.E. Massengil wants to create a liquid version of the popular antibiotic. Their chemist discovers it dissolves perfectly into diethylene glycol. You know, diethylene glycol, another name for it is antifreeze, and forgive me for botching these words. But nobody tested it, nobody asked questions. They bottled it up, they called it elixir sulfonamide, and then shipped it across the country. Nobody tested it, nobody asked questions, they bottled it up, and that was it. 107 people have died, most of them were children, and parents wrote heartbreaking letters to the FDA describing their kids dying in agony. The chemist who created that formula took his own life. Congress responded immediately with the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938, and drugs must be proven safe before going into the market. The modern FDA was born from the bodies of 107 Americans, again, mostly children. But as we are about to see, this lesson did not last. Now, let's fast forward into the 1950s for a second. Europe is in love with this new drug called thalidomide, and it's marketed as a safe sedative, perfect for pregnant women who are dealing with morning sickness, and you know, it's being sold to like 46 different countries, by the way, and doctors love it, patients loved it. But an American pharmaceutical company applies to bring it to the U.S. market, and the application lands on the desk of an FDA medical officer named Frances Kelsey. Kelsey looks at this data and says, no way, not yet. The safety evidence isn't there yet. The company pressured her. They go to her superiors, they file complaint after complaint with her, trying to get her overruled. And for over a year, they harassed this woman trying to get their drug approved on the market. But she held out, and thankfully so, because meanwhile in Europe, the results started coming in that this so-called thalidomide was causing catastrophic birth defects in over 10,000 babies born with missing, severely deformed limbs, and thousands more stillborn. An entire generation of Europe was completely destroyed, as well as Australia. And because of Frances Kelsey, America was largely spared as a result of this. Now, of course, President Kennedy personally awarded her with the President's Award of Distinguished Federal Civilian Service, which is the highest award you could get as a civilian, in 1962. Congress responded to the Carver-Harris Amendment that now drugs that didn't just have to be safe, they had to be proven to be effective, and clinical trials became mandatory. So the way it works is you have phases 1, 2, 3, and then you get the review. So phase 1 is safety and testing in small groups. Phase 2 is effectiveness testing in larger groups. Phase 3 is large-scale trials comparing against existing treatments. And then the FDA looks at it, reviews it, and if you're lucky, they will approve it. But again, the average time from discovery to approval today is 12 long staking years. Yes, 12 years to approve it, $2.6 billion, and only 12% of drugs that actually go through these clinical trials actually ever make it to market. So for drugs that are going to your bloodstream, affecting your brain and organs, Francis Kelsey proved that rigor matters. But here's the thing, the same system that was built to prevent the next thalidomide incident had also been used to block treatments that could save millions of American lives. And nothing proves that more than what we were about to talk about today, which is also stem cell research. Yes, stem cells. They are the human body as master cells, biological blank slates that can develop into virtually any cell type in the body. Heart muscle, brain neurons, liver cells, pancreatic cells, bones, blood, you name it. And this is not theoretical science, by the way, like we thought back in 2010. These are published peer-reviewed results from the most prestigious universities and colleges around the world. Medical institutions as well. Because in 2010, clinical trials published the Lancet, one of the most prestigious medical journals on the planet. And they showed them that cell therapy restored partial sensation, movement with patients with complete spinal cord injuries. People told that they would never be able to move again are now moving. Researchers published in the New England Journal of Medicine showed that cell transplants putting type 1 diabetes into complete remission. Patients who had been on insulin dependent for years no longer need insulin injections anymore. There's also studies from the University of Miami documenting cell stem therapy significantly showing ALS progression, Lou Gehrig's disease, conditions that always had a fatal and that currently there's no cure for. Clinical trials in Japan and South Korea have shown that stem cell therapy reversing early stage Parkinson's disease actually regenerated the dopamine producing neurons that the disease actually destroyed. And there's also stem cell treatments for macular degeneration leading to the cause of blindness in older Americans, but have restored their vision in trials in UK and in Japan. There's also heart disease patients receiving stem cell injections into damaged cardiac tissue that have been shown measurable regeneration, like actually measurable regeneration of heart muscles previously considered to be permanently scarred and damaged. This published, peer-reviewed, and the documentation is actually real. It's there, you can look it up yourself in any sort of medicine journal you want. People are literally flying to Panama, flying to Mexico, going to Germany or Japan, and spending $20,000 to $200,000 a whack at these things, out of pocket for these treatments. But because their own government won't allow it on American soil. Terminal cancer patients, ALS patients with months to live, children with rare genetic cancers and diseases, veterans with spinal cord injuries, they're literally flying halfway across the world because the FDA will not allow their doctor to use their own cells to save their own life. Americans are, well, I hate to say this, but medical refugees in their own lifetime. And we really need to talk about exactly how it all happened. And so let's talk about the stem cell controversy. Now, because I want to be honest, right, with you tonight, because, this is not a simple black and white situation. These are legitimate inside stem cell conversations that you deserve to hear, and you deserve to hear all of them. The first controversy is the embryonic stem cell controversy. It's the most powerful stem cells that come from the human body. They come from the human embryos, specifically from the embryo itself. And it creates a IVF that would otherwise be discarded These cells can become virtually any cell type in the body, making them extraordinarily valuable for the research. But to harvest them, you must destroy the embryo. And for millions of Americans who believe that life begins at contraception, this is a morally equivalent to ending a human life. And that is not a fringe position. It is deeply held, convicted, shared by tens of millions of people across the country. And so it's so bad that it's shaped federal policy for over 25 years. Even George W. Bush restricted federal funding to only 21 existing embryonic cell lines in 2001. Obama reversed it in 2009. Trump restricted the fetal tissue research in 2019. And the research had been a political football driven by, not by science, by the way, but by ideology from both sides. Scientists have argued that, restrictions have cost decades of potential breakthroughs. Opponents argue some lines should not be crossed, regardless of potential benefit. Both sides are arguing in good faith that this is not an easy answer here, and it is really not. It has been a deeply hard problem here in the United States. And as a result, a lot of people are not going to get the treatment that they want. Now, there's other controversy as well. There's a second controversy, which is your own cells classified as a drug. And this is where the FDA's position becomes generally hard to defend, I think. Because the FDA classifies your own cells taken from your body, as a biological drug subject to full pharmaceutical regulation. It says here that it means that if a doctor takes stem cells from your own body, your own fat tissue or bone marrow, and re-injects them into your own body, the FDA considers that to be manufacturing and distributing. I don't know where you're manufacturing to or distributing from. It's from your own body, but whatever. It's your cells from your body, requiring billions of dollars, by the way, to cost in clinical trials, just so you can use it on yourself. But in 2017, the FDA raided a Florida clinic called U.S. Stem Cell Inc., and they had been treating patients with their own cells for ALS, Parkinson's, macular degeneration, and unfortunately, 3 patients lost vision after a procedure went wrong. The FDA used those three bad outcomes to justify a nationwide crackdown, shutting down clinics across the country, including many with clean safety records. Yes, clean safety records. The 3 bad outcomes and thousands of patients lose access. If you decide that makes sense, let me know in the comments down below. We're going to move on to the third controversy that I have written down here, which is that the FDA has approved some stem cell therapy, but the price tags are obscene. See, a Zolgensma stem cell gene therapy for children with spine muscular atrophy costs about $3.5 million per treatment. Kinura stem cell based cancer therapy is about $475,000 for a single treatment. Luxturna gene therapy for inherent blindness will run you about $850,000 for a single treatment. And so the FDA's regulatory structure has ensured that most revolutionary medical treatments in human history are only available to the ultra wealthy and the ultra privileged. And so the treatments only exist. The treatments do exist, I'm saying, and the science works, but regular Americans cannot afford them. And that leads us to the right to try, which is the fourth controversy. Because in 2018, Congress passed the Right to Try Act. It's for terminal patients to access experimental treatments before doing the whole full FDA approval thing. So to get to trial 1, trial 2, if they do really good in trial 2, they'll send it out. Just as an example. Because in practice, pharmaceutical companies are not required to participate, by the way, most of them because of liability concerns, and the FDA has the authority to intervene at any point in time. The patients still face serious designed to protect corporate interests as much as the patient safety, which is also an issue. And the law only exists on paper, and the treatments remain largely out of reach to a lot of patients. So, take it for what you want for the Right to Try Act. Yeah, it's on the books. We could do it, but companies are not required to participate. And so there's other treatments, by the way, that the FDA has also suppressed. I mean, stem cells, by the way, are just the most biggest example, but they are far from the only one. The FDA has a long pattern of blocking and delaying treatments that threaten the pharmaceutical status quo. And for example, psychedelic therapy, right? For decades, we know that the FDA has classified psilocybin, the active component in magic mushrooms, by the way, as a Schedule 1. No medical value, and research is pretty much impossible. It is impossible. A single dose of psilocybin, though, combined with therapy, showed that 80% success rate in helping cancer patients overcome death anxiety. 67% of long-term smokers quit after psilocybin therapy compared to the 35%, and most of them are effective existing medications with patients with treatment with persisting depression. People who had failed at every available antidepressant showed dramatic improvement after 2 sessions. In other words, if they got rid of their meds and they went on mushrooms, they showed a significant increase in improvement, an overall improvement. But there's some good news, because the FDA did finally grant psilocybin breakthrough therapy designation in 2018. Decades of research first identified its therapeutic potential, and decades of patients with treatment-resistant depression went without help while the FDA sat on the evidence. So yeah, they have granted the breakthrough therapy and all that stuff, but they sat on the evidence for psilocybin treatment to help patients with depression and other ailments like PTSD, for example. They just sat on it, which is pretty gross, to say the least. But anyways, the MDA therapy for PTSD, assisted MDA therapy showed about 67% of veterans no longer met the criteria for PTSD, which I find to be crazy. After treatment in phase 3 critical trials, for context, the existing PTSD medication help was about 30% for patients. So the FDA rejected MDA therapy. They approved it in 2024. Veterans with severe PTSD who had exhausted every other option was denied access for MDMA therapy. And then there was the Clark-Shine scandal. Again, I'm not good with every word, so I'm sorry about that. But the Clark-Shine incident was a drug used to treat gout, I guess, for over 2,000 years. It was the ancient Greek used that they used back in the day, and doctors have been prescribing it safely for decades for just a penny a pill. But in 2009, the FDA was granted a pharmaceutical company called URL Pharmaceutical, and they gave them the most exclusive rights to that same medication, and they put it under a brand name called Colcrise. And they funded a single clinical trial proving that everyone already knew that it worked. And then they made like $4.85 per pill off the same medication that was being charged a penny. So yeah, it went from like 9 cents a pill to like $4.85 a pill overnight, which is about a 5,000% increase. Pretty disgusting, huh? And then there's the ivermectin COVID scandal, which we're going to get into, because during the COVID-19 pandemic, multiple doctors claimed ivermectin showed promise treating COVID, but the FDA issued aggressive public guidance telling people not to use it, posting messages comparing Americans to horses and cows. Studies have shown generally mixed results, some showing modest benefits, others showing that none of the scientific evidence is worth it. It was very unclear, but because of the FDA's aggressive campaign against it, the FDA-approved drug that was used safely for decades was simultaneously being fast-tracked under the Emergency Use Authorization Act. And it raised legitimate questions about the consistency and the political influence that it had on science. Now, doctors were threatened, by the way, with their license being revocated for prescribing the FDA drug with the off-label, and which is crazy because it's completely legal. It's millions of Americans every day in America deal with that shit. It's just wild. It's just crazy. Anyways, let's get into the deepest part of the chapter, because the FDA has created so much harm than it has prevented. So much harm than it has prevented, guys. So, where do I start? The FDA approved OxyContin, right? They approved it based on, largely on data provided by the Purdue Pharma itself. The FDA accepts their claim that, extended the release formula and made it less addictive than other opioids. They were going on that story. And the claim was, by the way, false, because Purdue Pharma knew that it was false. The internal documents revealed that bankruptcy proceedings showed executives were aware of the addiction and the potential risks, and they concealed it. Now, the FDA, of course, they approved it anyways. And Purdue Pharma and their sales reps were incentivized to get doctors to prescribe as many pills as possible. They targeted primary care doctors, they offered trips and speaking fees, and they pushed the idea that addiction was under just 1%. 500,000 Americans died from the opioid overdose between 1999 and 2023. Entire communities hollowed out, families destroyed, and even children were orphaned. But anyways, Purdue Pharma paid $634 million in fines in 2007 and 2019, and they filed bankruptcy. So the Sackler family, by the way, who personally directed the market agency, walked away with billions of dollars. The FDA approved was a key part in the worst drug crisis in American history, the antidepressant cover-up, which is another thing we're going to be talking about. Because in 2004, an analyst named David Graham testified before the Senate Finance Committee as a whistleblower. He revealed that the FDA had a normal data showing antidepressants significantly increased suicide risk in children and in adolescents. This data had largely been suppressed as well. He also revealed that there's internal FDA analysis showing that the painkillers Vicks or Vicodin manufactured by Merck had caused between 88,000 and 139,000 heart attacks. The FDA had also known and had done nothing about it for years. Now, Graham told the Senate directly that the FDA is virtually defenseless against Ox, and he was right. Another Vicodin issue. Because it's a revolving door, by the way. And between 2006 and 2019, more than 300 FDA employees left the agency to work for a pharmaceutical company that they had previously regulated, documented in a study published by the journal Science, by the way. And so, that being said, the former FDA commissioner had taken a board seat, consulted contracts worth millions of dollars at the pharmaceutical companies whose drugs they largely approved. And this is not a conspiracy, by the way. This is like documented fact. People are regulating the drug industry who are the same ones that are being paid by the drug industry. You know what I mean? So the regulators are going to the industry and regulating what they regulated. It's just fucking absolutely wild. It's like the SPLC is combating against racism, but they're paying the racists. It's the same fucking shit with the FDA. And hopefully I made that abundantly clear in our last segment, because this is the part that I want to talk about the most in this video. And I have my notes here because I want to get this right? Is that the FDA, should be absolutely furious, because I'm furious about this, is that the FDA demands a 12 years and $2.6 billion to approve a single drug. It blocks dying Americans from using their own stem cells. It rejected MDMA therapy for veterans with PTSD, and suppressed data on antidepressants on the risks with suicide in young children and adolescents. But your food, the FDA operates under something called GRAS, G-R-A-S, generally recognized as safe food. These companies can declare their own ingredients safe without any sort of independent FDA review. They self-certify literally their own safety stuff. They say, yeah, our food's safe, and they certify it, and they give it to the FDA, and the FDA says, okay, cool, we're cool with that. In 2013, a report in JAMA, the Internal Medicine, found that out of the 451 GRAS determinations made between 1987 and 2012, not a single expert panel had disclosed conflict of interest. Every single panel was stacked with industry insiders declaring their own ingredients as listed safe. Now, over 10,000 chemicals are in the American foods right now, and the FDA has independently reviewed almost none of them. Almost none of them. There's a few, but almost none of them. And here's what that looks like in practice, by the way. So, red dye 3 is a synthetic dye that makes food pink and red. The FDA banned it in cosmetics in 1990, acknowledging it can cause thyroid cancer in animals. Then left it into your food for another 35 years. They finally announced a ban it was last year in 2025 of January, and now they're giving manufacturers until 2027 to remove it. Your kids have been eating dye the FDA knew caused cancer in animals, and since before most of them were even born. I was born in '89, so like my whole life. Isn't that nice? But anyways, then we have brominated vegetable oil, used in citrus sodas since 1970s, banned in the EU, Japan, and India. In India, of all places, they're fucking banned. The UK, the FDA has only proposed a banning in 2023. Titanium dioxide, which is used for painting, that I use for my oil paints. Toxic stuff. This food makes your food look whiter. It was banned in Europe in 2022 over DNA damage concerns. Still in America, candy and gum today. You don't look at me, look it up yourself. Potassium bromate makes bread fluffier, classified as a possible carcinogen by the International Agency for Research in Cancer. Banned in the EU, Canada, China of all places, Brazil, even Brazil of all places. And it's still completely legal and baked in America, which is why I do my utmost to bake my own bread. It doesn't matter what brand it is. It's all in the fucking bread, man. Mike's bread, probably the only one. But just make your own bread at this point. Then you have potassium bromate, which makes blood. Then you have BHA and BHT preservatives. It's in cereals, chips. The National Toxicology Program identifies as BHA as reasonably anticipated to be a human carcinogen. Europe requires warning labels, and the FDA calls them generally recognized as safe. These things cause cancer. Like, they kill your DNA. And here's the details, by the way, that just like ties this all together. So when the EU bans an ingredient, right, the American food companies do not remove it globally. They only make two versions of the same product, a clean version for the Europeans and a chemical version for the Americans. So they know about this stuff in Europe, but they're still making chemical versions of it. I would imagine it'd be easier just to switch to all the same. But like say, for example, Fanta, orange in Europe. Orange juice that's natural flavors. Fanta orange in America is brominated in vegetable oil and artificial dyes. The same brand companies like that are two different completely products, but because of the European regulations protect the citizens, the FDA lets the Americans corporations decide what is safe for you. So you can't get the European version unless you order it online, and it's expensive. I looked it up. So these are just a lot of the examples that I went over in this video so far. And this is where we land tonight, okay? The FDA was born from tragedy. 107 people, most of them were children, were dead from the antifreeze and their medicine. There was one person by the name of Francis Kelsey that saved a generation of Americans from refusing to approve a drug that was going to destroy children across Europe. At its best, the FDA, Francis Kelsey, standing firm against pressure, protecting Americans from harm, and doing exactly what it was supposed to do. But at its worst, the FDA is an agency that approved OxyContin based on Purdue Pharma's own data that helped ignite the crisis that killed 500,000 Americans, that suppressed evidence about antidepressants and suicide risks in children and adolescents, that let painkillers like Vicodin and shit caused over 100,000 heart attacks before it was pulled, or in this case, VIX, VIXX, was caused over 100,000 heart attacks before it was pulled. that watches 300 of its own employees walk out the door and take $1 million job offers at companies they just recently regulated. Stem cells that were the stakes at the highest, right? The science was actually real. The results were actually documented to help these patients with spinal cord injury, regaining movement, diabetes, getting them off insulin, helping them with ALS, even like severe tinnitus or ringing of the ears. Anything that could help them is now neuron disease, like gone. Just won't be allowed. Americans are flying literally to Mexico, Panama and Germany to access these treatments. Their own government won't allow it. You know what I mean? Terminal patients with months left to live are being denied access to their own cells. And a financial incentive to keep those treatments expensive and accessible is egregious, and it's enormous. Meanwhile, your kids are eating red dye 3, the dye that FDA banned from lipstick back in 1990 because it caused cancer in animals. And it's still in your food today until 2027 at its earliest. They're supposed to replace it with beet juice. But that is, the FDA is not really the villain of a movie nor a conspiracy theory. It's a real agency with real history of real failures, captured by the industries it was built to regulate, protecting corporate profits as often as it protects its public health. Know what you're eating, know what treatments exist, demand the right to access your own cells, and ask why most powerful medical regulatory agency in the world makes it nearly impossible to heal with your own biology, while letting corporations decide what chemicals are best for your children's food. And now you can't say we didn't know. You know what I mean? Like, this has been real, guys. You know, you make the decision. This is The Outpost. I'll see you next time.